Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Saturday. Congratulations, AMRADs. You made it through the week, enjoying this weekend, and grateful to have you with us here on rumble.com/AMRADPod. It's 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live, guys. If you haven't already, please smash the thumbs up and give us a follow. You can subscribe if you want to do that here on Rumble. We appreciate it. Definitely subscribe to the audio format on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart. We drop the episodes every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, just after we get done recording the show. So you can get it there in the audio format. We're trying to grow there. There are a lot of people seeking the content. There are Americans out there that we need to radicalize to our ideology, our way of thinking. And as it is a Saturday, we're going to go back to the Saturday grab bag. It's a tradition like no other here on the American Radicals Podcast. The only caveat is it's just me today at Real Steve Friend. Going to be running solo. Garrett couldn't come here and join us today. Had some complications, but I do have a proof of life. There wasn't a SWAT team arriving at his door. He's J-A-OK. You just have to get an update from him next week on Tuesday. But it is a Saturday, and we are going to be covering down on a smorgasbord of stuff, and I'm excited to get through it all. I don't know if we'll even get through it all, but it is a Saturday. Maybe we'll just have to be here for hours if it takes it, because we're already talking about the DOGE, the cuts from the DOGE, which are getting canceled. Thank you very much, Republicans, those fiscal conservatives. You have another Republican, a senator, mind you, who says that illegal aliens are owed some sort of due process after illegally entering our country. You have entitled communists, particularly the liberal white women who live in the suburbs and will gleefully cut off the genitals of their children to impress their friends at Sunday brunch. They are showing their elitism. The media is lying, as always, but this time they're actually rewarding themselves for their lies, which is always fun. And then we're going to have a hit piece on protein consumption, because apparently you're based if you like to eat protein. I got to allow that, a whole bunch more. Before we do, let's thank the sponsor for today's show, which is the M-Clip Company. M-Clip.com, M-Clip.com. And our proprietary code for them for the discount is suspendable, SUSPENDABLE, to get 10% off. These are money clips, luxury money clips. I've had mine for, going on a decade and a half now, which is awesome because I get complimented on it all the time. You can get your initials monogrammed on there. You can get it looking like it's leather, metallic, favorite baseball team. These are a great gift, guys. Also, we are in the month of May now, so definitely a graduation season gift. You got the graduate who's going to be entering the workforce. They're going to need a money clip to go along with their brand new job, and it won't break the bank either, because you'll get the 10% off with the promo code suspendable. And you can also get our iconography, our emblem, our logo, all of it 10% off at m-clip.com. And the promo code is suspendable. So I don't know. I think I've got like 14, 15 different stories to get to today. I'm going to struggle my mightiest to get through it all for you because Saturday's fun. It's a smorgasbord. I try to organize it into some semblance, but if I fail, who cares? It's a Saturday. So without further ado, let's get to it. And I alluded to the DOGE. We actually had Garrett ask me about the DOGE problem on Thursday, and I said, dang it, you spoiled Saturday's show. So let's get to it and talk about reporting from the Washington Post because democracy dies in darkness. The GOP balks at approving even a fraction of Elon Musk's DOGE cuts, the Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk, at least for the time being, until he realizes that you just can't change things in Washington, no matter how hard you try, no matter how smart you are, and how much money you have. It seems like the swamp has no bottom. So, reporting from WAPO says the administration initially floated sending $9 billion of DOGE cuts to the Hill. For a side note, Elon Musk and DOGE have claimed $160 billion in savings. So just a fraction, $9 billion proposed that would be eliminating things like USAID and funding for PBS and NPR, all things that everyone seems to agree are an objectively good thing. And yet, the idea for Congress to pass Elon Musk cuts dates to the closed door lunch between lawmakers a couple of months ago. Now, Representative Tom Cole from Oklahoma, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, said that passing the cuts could be difficult, even in the Republican-controlled Congress. Why do we elect Republicans? With Republicans like these, who needs communists? Senator Rand Paul, who's a libertarian and he's a fiscal hawk, I think he kind of sums it up nicely. Here's a quote from him in this Washington Post piece. Quote, if we can't pass a $9 billion rescission package, we might as well all pack it up, give in, and admit we're all going to go bankrupt. Unquote. With Republicans like these, who needs Democrats? Who needs communists? It's just too dang hard to eliminate things that everyone agrees should be eliminated, including these Republicans who have gone on media and you know that they've fundraised on that. You know, when they went home during their breaks and they've had just so many breaks. I think that the number of working days that they've had compared to the weekdays where they've not been at work is relatively equal. So if there's roughly 250 working days, Monday through Friday, and we exclude holidays, they're on track to work like 120 of them. So hardly doing the work on behalf of the American people. But they go fundraise and they update their websites and they mail out things to their constituents about the DOGE. They can't wait. We had Joni Ernst, who couldn't wait to spike Pete Hegseth's nomination to be the Secretary of Defense. And then when she got a little bit of heat, she got herself to the head of the DOGE. You have other representatives in Congress. I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Anna Paulina Luna, they're all getting on these committees. These are subcommittees within the Congress to try to bring about the DOGE's recommendations and their findings about things that need to be cut and eliminated in order to ensure that our government operates efficiently. They're going to work with Congress to get these rescissions, which basically means we're just going to pull the money back. We don't have to spend the money on USAID so that they can then launder it to their friends and NGOs, or eventually get it down to South America to make sure that we're doing a proper level of trans, Eskimo, little person fashion shows, those sorts of things. They need to be cut and eliminated. And even a small cut here, 9 billion out of 160 billion is just a step too far for Republicans. They've got their eye on the ball, though. They really want to get to things that are truly important and a higher priority than saving $9 billion. And what is $1 billion? A billion is 1,000 million. How many millions you got lying around? You want to 1,000x that and realize just how many zeros it is? We've got 9 billion going out the door to USAID and to NPR and PBS so they can go out and publicly and broadcast how Big Bird really wants to chop his genitals off. But we've got other priorities, which the Republicans are very excited about, reporting from CNN. House is now passing a Republican-led bill to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. America is just so back. I mean, we're bankrupt entirely on the fiscal cliff. We've let go of the rope entirely at this point, and it's just a matter of time between now and when our kids and grandkids inevitably have to go through what they're going to label austerity measures, meaning that your quality of life will necessarily have to be decreased because the dollars you're spending are worth less because there's just too many out there because we've borrowed and printed too much of it to afford these unnecessary programs like Big Bird saying that he needs to cut off his genitals and some sort of, I don't know, educational effort in Afghanistan, which eventually ends in the money going to the Taliban through USAID. Those are really important. We have to keep those propped up. We can't cut that money. But here's what we can do. We can update our maps. Thank you, Republicans. So to this story from CNN, the bill would require federal agencies to update all maps and documents with the name Gulf of America. The executive order that Donald Trump signed, and he has that map prominently displayed behind him at the Resolute desk inside the Oval Office. That doesn't really have the force of law. He needs to have the balance of powers here, right? Co-equal branches of government, they have to work together in order to get this officially done on official maps and documents. House Democrats, meanwhile, have harshly criticized the decision to hold this vote on the bill, calling it a waste of time and taxpayer dollars. Well, I guess we found the one thing I agree with Democrats on. I don't care what the map says. I care about my kids being able to, I don't prosper somewhat in the future, having a currency level, a dollar that is not so devalued that it's going to cost them $1 trillion United States dollars to fill up a gas tank, like we're in some sort of Zimbabwe death spiral of inflation. But Republicans really have their eye on the prize, and that is claiming, look, we're base now. We're taking things uber seriously. We're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Don't pay attention to any sort of fiscal sanity from the party of fiscal conservatism. And then the other thing that alleged conservatives are very concerned about, and it was one of the top issues. So we're disregarding entirely inflation because of the government spending that we're refusing to rein in. What was the other big issue that resulted in a mandate being sent in November of 2024? It was immigration and inflation. And we're hearing all the time about the Tren de Aragua and the MS-13 guys being ejected from the country. As an aside, we're on track for less than 1 million deportations in the next 4 years during the Trump administration. And we'll see what sort of bulwark will be established by the courts and all the different rulings that we're getting from these rogue judges. And then when we have a midterm election that inevitably swings back hard to the left, which historically would be consistent, how is the administration going to push forward any sort of deportation effort when Donald Trump's in the process of being impeached another 2, 3, half dozen times beginning in January 2027? But back to immigration. Now, all these Republicans have been hardliners here, right? We want to get rid of the bad actors, the people who violated our laws and snuck across the border and have been living in the shadows. But when it comes down to it, when they're really pressed for it, they got to go to the GOAT, right? They got to go to a senator from one of the most conservative, blood red states in the union who has a history of doing things to completely stab us in the back. James Lankford, Senator, Oklahoma, who prior to the election partnered with Democrats to give a bipartisan bill that would have essentially allowed a flow of 5,000 illegal aliens to, quote, lawfully enter the country every single day, and then eventually get citizenship given to them. But if it exceeded 5,000, well, then we would definitely crack down on things. That was James Lankford. That was a bill that was floated out by Mitch McConnell, and they let Lankford run with it. And then when the base pushed back on it, they completely ran the bus over James Lankford, but he wasn't in cycle. He wasn't up for re-election, and they're hoping that you're going to forget about it. Well, now James Lankford might, I think, be in cycle again, which is kind of curious because he thinks illegal aliens ought to have civil rights.
What's been confusing on this is some people see due process like as an American citizen. that's a right to a jury trial. That's all those different things. That's not true for due process for someone who's not a citizen of the United States. It's a different process. It's often just literally what people call an immigration judge is not a typical federal judge or a state judge. This is someone that's in the bureaucracy, that their task for DHS is that task on it. So they're a government employee career. That's an immigration judge. So it's a very different process for it. But yes, there's a need to be able to give an opportunity for someone to be able to make an argument before they're removed in the country. It's just what's been.
Oh, thank you very much, James Langford. So illegal aliens can make an argument that they're entitled to some level of due process. Due process is constitutionally bequeathed to citizens of the country who have engaged in the social compact, the arrangement that we have, where the understanding is that we stood up a government to ensure that our rights are protected, and we will give up some of our liberties for that level of protection. Illegals aren't entitled to that. If they want that, they could come in the front door. Now, we're going to screen them and vet them properly, and yet they disregarded that entirely, snuck across the border, lived here, I don't care how long, 15 minutes, 15 years. Their first act to enter our land was to break our law. And now you have a United States Senator with the gall, a Republican, saying, well, we have to give them some sort of process, right? James Langford, that little squish, should be primaried out of office. It shouldn't even be close. And yet you'll go to the polls and you'll see the results, and it'll be 8% of Republicans show up, and James Langford will be reelected yet again, like all of them are. You know, I've heard this before, and I'll take credit for it, because why not? Garrett's not here to hold me accountable. You hear the term rhino. Republican in name only. That's the pejorative that gets thrown out by real conservatives who have nowhere else to go. They're Richard Gere and An Officer and a Gentleman. I have nowhere else to go. And they have to vote for the Republicans. Now, it's thrown at people who are deemed to be, well, you're not really conservative. You just happen to have an R next to your name. You're Republican in name only. I think it's actually diametrically different. I think that conservatives who have nowhere else to go are the rhinos. You have nowhere else to go, so you have to vote for the Republican Party because they're perceived to be somewhat more conservative than the Communist Democrat Party. But you're not really a Republican. What a Republican is James Langford saying that illegal aliens ought to have due process. It's the elected officials in Washington, D.C. saying, fiscal conservatism sounds good on the campaign trail, but we really can't cut $9 billion. I mean, that money has to go to intersectional people in the Philippines, make sure that they're properly tan and woke and gay so that they can conduct a study about cocaine usage in carrier pigeons. That's really what America is all about. Those are the Republicans. Won't vote to cut that. And then, of course, they'll pound their chests and go and brag about the fact that they updated the maps to say Gulf of America. So if you're a true, really conservative person who believes in small government, individual liberty, and you are a registered Republican, I think you're kind of the rhino. I think there's a pretty strong case to be made there. All right, let's pivot away from the Republicans just as a party itself, because they suck, as do the communists. But let's talk about some movies. We did our obligatory movie reference, Officer and a Gentleman. There might be less movies, though, coming to America because of the Donald Trump-inspired tariffs. This is reporting from the BBC that there's now a push to hit non-US movies with 100% tariffs. So we're going to go after Hollywood, and I'm here for it. That's fantastic. So Donald Trump says he will hit movies made in foreign countries with 100% tariffs. Now, on its face, you're thinking, wow, I mean, they got subtitles. I don't care about that. That's not actually true, though. And there's a little bit of ambiguity because several recent major movies produced in U.S. studios were actually shot outside of the country. That included Deadpool and Wolverine, Gladiator 2, and Wicked, which all did really pretty well at the box office. Now, the statement about this 100% tariff, Isn't necessarily really clear because it didn't say whether the tariff would apply to American production companies producing films abroad or if it's just going to be foreign production companies. It was also unclear if the tariffs would apply to films on streaming services. I don't know why, if you're going to go to the movie theater or watch it on Netflix, why that would matter. But I guess when it comes to tariffs, they can be very specific in how they want to go after. And maybe a Trump administration might give a carve out to your Netflix of the world, whereas the Lionsgates or the Warner Brothers, they're going to get banged over the head. But it'll be interesting to see, where it goes from there, and particularly because the tariffs are hitting home, and they shall be. You're really going to start feeling it. The projection is here in the next week or so, because there's a delay in the shipping processes. It takes like 30 to 45 days in order to logistically move the cheap goods from China to the United States, because you got to send the boats across. So now there's push to enlighten the American people about what they can really expect to feel like, where you're going to get hit, what types of products. I mean, some things are actually made and produced in America, and they're not going to feel it. And they are more expensive, so you might feel it anyway, just because you have to move on over to buying American goods. Or if you're going to continue to buy foreign goods in light of the tariffs, you are going to absorb the tariff. The company isn't. They're just going to raise the prices. Now, I went to the Huffington Post. I did, so you didn't have to, because they want to make sure that they enlighten Americans about what we could be seeing here, and in empty shelves. So the reporting was, don't expect toilet paper shortages. That's a good thing. Where were you in 2020 during the great toilet paper shortage of coronavirus lockdowns? Because essential goods like food and beverages and paper goods are more likely to be made in the United States. So those things should be okay. Direct-to-consumer brands like Temu used to rely on this shipment exemption. So it was called a de minimis shipment exemption to sell cheap goods to U.S. consumers. So if you would sell foreign goods to Americans, and as long as it was under $800 worth of goods, you didn't get hit over the head with a tariff. But now, because of the new tariffs, that's going away. So if you're buying cheap foreign goods via Temu or Shine, the tariffs are going to impact you. Now, dollar store essentials like soap, batteries, toothpaste, disposable plates, which is paper, I don't know why, those will be impacted first because those goods experience extreme cost pressure. And here's where they go for the heartstrings. You looked up at a calendar lately? 4th of July is coming, and HuffPo wants to make sure you are adequately scared. 4th of July items like flags and fireworks, those are made in China, so they're going to be more expensive. And then you look back up at the calendar right after 4th of July, and school's starting. Back to school items, pencils, notebooks, computer bags, those are going to be more expensive. And then we're heading into the summer, patio furniture and home decor. Consumer electronics, I think, kind of goes without saying. And we buy a lot of our electronics from overseas. We don't really have that base here in the United States. Those will necessarily skyrocket as a result. One that is kind of concerning to me is appliance replacement stuff like filters, cords, light bulbs. Those are going to go up. Factories in China make nearly 80% of all the toys in America. So, these stick around. Watch out for Christmas. I guess you're going to have to write to Santa Claus, give a more comprehensive list to him and the elves to make those for you. Because if you're buying them from China, I don't think you're going to be able to afford quite as a robust stack and pile of presents under the tree come December. And that is, of course, assuming that the tariffs remain and there's no sort of reciprocal agreement and no sort of mediation can be reached. And I believe that there are negotiations ongoing between our head of state and other heads of state. So things remain in flux, but gird your loins, be prepared. If there is any sort of fail here, not on economic theory, I'm not an economist. I don't play one here on TV or on the American Radicals podcast. I do, though, think that there's been a failure of messaging, particularly as it comes to the pain that can be expected. Americans aren't used to austerity, and we're going to have to experience it when we continue to send $9 billion to USAID and Big Bird. That is inevitable. and that will hurt when it comes. But in the near term, there will be pain as it comes to these tariffs. And we exist in a instant gratification culture, a time when you can put your DoorDash on payments. You can finance food delivery at this point because people are so consumed with consuming now that they are unwilling to cook at home. Tell those people that they have to go to Walmart when they buy a $12 t-shirt. It's now going to cost $28. That hasn't been messaged properly, and I think people are going to get smacked across the face, which bodes kind of poorly for when they start to experience this and then the electoral results of it. When you combine the fact that the James Langfords of the world are messaging how legal aliens deserve due process, and then people's wallets get hit, get ready, rhinos. And then by that, I mean conservatives who are forced to vote for Republican. There is a blue wave a coming, and that's my speculation. All right, well, let's pivot away into something completely different, and we're going to talk about some of the worst people on earth. And I have to issue a caveat. I'm not going to say white because one of them's not, but she's white adjacent, so maybe I will add it. Liberal white women who live in the suburbs, drive a Subaru, have a coexist bumper sticker, the ones who will gleefully chop off the genitals of their children so that they can go to Sunday brunch because they don't go to church. I mean, let's be real here. Sip mimosas with their friends and brag that they have a trans kid. And that was the explanation for today's thumbnail. So let's talk about a few of them. First one is former First Lady, FLOTUS, Michelle Obama, who, reporting at the Daily Mail, they report that she is entitled. And I have no reason to dispute that because this is what Michelle Obama said. Let me see if I can't pull this up on the fly here, guys. I am operating here on the American Radicals podcast by myself and lonesome today. And here it is. This is Michelle Obama speaking about the difficulties, the trials and tribulations of living in the White House.
Many people don't know. I mean, much is not covered. You're paying for every food, every bit of food that you eat. You're not paying for housing and the staff in it, but everything, even travel. If you're not traveling with the president, if your kids are coming on a Bright Star, which is the First Lady's plane, we had to pay for their travel.
Oh my goodness. Perish the thought. You had to buy your own food when you were in the White House. Like, that wasn't provided for you. And in fact, when you flew privately on a private jet with full security, you had to pay the price for your children. You weren't buying the fuel. You weren't paying for the pilot. You had to go and send your aide because you weren't doing it. You weren't hopping online and going to orbits to see what the price of a Southwest ticket was from Washington, D.C. to wherever you're headed. In her case, Martha's Vineyard or Honolulu. You send your aide to find what the cheapest ticket was, and that's your obligation to pay. That's how it works. And that's not limited to Michelle Obama, but certainly that entitled perception as she had, and as it was reported here in Daily Mail. And just a little more details. The Obama's net worth ranges between $70 and $135 million. That makes them some of the richest presidents to ever leave office, behind Donald Trump, who's a billionaire, and the Clintons, who also profited quite handsomely from their time in the 90s. And Michelle Obama has a problem having to pay for her own food while she lived in the White House, rent-free, and then complaining again about having to pony up when her kids flew private to go on vacation, as the Obamas loved to do during their time in office. Now, that's one FLOTUS. Let's go to another FLOTUS who is in the running for worst person, not like as a group, but I'm talking about worst actual person on earth today, which is saying something because you have like dictators in North Korea who are starving their people. But Jill Biden, who trots her husband out there every single day, continuously now, the human Roomba. And I have no sympathy for Joe Biden, who's a jerk. Under him, my family lost everything. He's a jerk who deserves to be embarrassed for the rest of his days, which are probably pretty limited. But FLOTUS, she's put him out there because she wants to stay relevant. They want to get back into politics. Watch out at an HOA near you. but maybe they won't necessarily be running for homeowners association seats, presidencies, because Jill now has a new job at the Milken Institute. They launched a new women's health network, and she is going to be the chairperson, not chairman, because that's very patriarchal. So the story here, Milken Institute launching this new women's health network. The Milken Institute describes itself as a nonpartisan economic think tank. Oh, I bet. They're based out of Santa Monica, California. They focus on financial, physical, mental, environmental health, like all the things. And they want to bring together the best ideas and resourcing to develop blueprints for tackling some of the most critical global issues. So naturally, you would go to Jill Biden, who has a doctorate in community colleges. Like if there was a medical emergency and they said we need a doctor, she's not the doctor who you call. Now, Jill Biden's new rule serving as a chair of the Milken Institute's initiative will focus on, quote, galvanizing participation, collaboration, and shared action in the Women's Health Network to improve women's health and well-being. So those are words in English. I think they're grammatically correct, but it's just gobbledygook. It's think tank government speak to effectively hide the fact that Jill Biden has a no-show job now out of California. She will make easily into the low to mid six figures for being the chairperson of an organization's outreach for women's health, because apparently 50% of the global population is all we care about now. And that goes for both sides. Back to the Republicans, back to the Democrats. I am pretty much up to my nose of hearing about how we have to have further outreach for the women. How about just all the people? How about you just do good and then expect good results for all the people? Why are we picking winners and losers? Well, it's easy because you pick your target demographic and you collect or a group, an amalgamation of individuals who might not actually share similar ideology, but you can get them all under one umbrella and say, I will punish your enemies and I will reward you and our friends. It's a very Marxist way of thinking of things. And clearly that's happened here for Jill Biden because she was a good and faithful servant. She trotted out her husband and made sure that he was necromanced long enough to make it through those 4 years when the puppet masters, the Jake Sullivans of the world, who are actually truly running the White House on a day-to-day basis, could implement some of the most radical change in the history of this country. I mean, the damage that Barack Obama did during his 8 years in office is incontrovertible. One of the most consequential presidents of the last century, we'll say. But I think there's a case that Joe Biden might have been worse. And I'm not doing the recency bias thing here. The thing where they say that George W. Bush is a Nazi. He's Hitler. And then he's out of office and the next Republican comes in and they say, Donald Trump, he's so much worse. We are pining for the days of George W. Bush. And then in a couple of years when Donald Trump is gone and you have J.D. Vance running for president, he's worse than Donald Trump. We wish we had Donald Trump back. It'll be the exact same thing over and over again. But I think back to Joe Biden, the fact that he was so asleep at the wheel in actuality, I mean, he was sleeping during the day, it allowed the extremists to gain a foothold, more than a foothold, actually complete power. There was no reins on them at any point. There was no Barack Obama there saying, look, I'm a fellow traveler here. I embrace this communist Marxist ideology, but we can't pull off the mask. We have to go a little bit slower. Stick to the plan. This is a long march through the institutions. Instead, it was pedal to the metal, get what you can while you can get it. And they got a whole bunch more in those 4 years under the Biden administration than they even did under the Barack Obama administration. Now, said that we're going to cover a group of these women. And we'll go to somebody else who was part of both the Barack Obama administration and the Joe Biden administration. And that's one Jen Psaki. She's a Peppermint Patty, Ginger Goebbels. And she's been actually doing the rounds, She took some time away from MSNBC because she left as the press secretary from the Biden administration, where she had to circle back all the time and never answer any questions. That was effectively her job, just a public servant that entire time. And she right away, because she was a nonpartisan person who wasn't spinning whatsoever, wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool communist, just rolled on into MSNBC and signed a $30 million contract over 5 years. And that doesn't include bonuses. $30 million, Jen Psaki. But now she's having to answer questions because Joe Biden is a human Roomba. And what did you know? And when did you know it? Jen Psaki.
I never saw that person, not a single time. And I was in the Oval Office every day that was on that debate stage. I'm not a doctor. Aging happens quite quickly.
Well, I mean, appeal to authority, much Jen Psaki. She's not a doctor. I mean, it's like Ketanji Jackson saying, well, I'm not a biologist. I can't tell you what a woman is. But in this case, she was being asked a pretty reasonable question. Look, you were the press secretary while you were there, at least before Sideshow Bob took the helm because you left to get your $30 million payday from MSNBC. Did you see any cognitive decline? And the story that I found was over at Daily Beast, again, a communist left-wing source, which loves the pop-ups. And I'm not going to subject the American Radicals podcast audience to that, but just digging into this piece a little bit more. So in response to the question about whether there was a cover-up regarding Joe Biden's condition, Jen Psaki said, quote, "I think cover-up is such a loaded phrase. People use that term as related to Watergate, or the covering up or not sharing public information about a war." That's the level that she puts it at. Like, this wasn't that bad. We were hiding, or not hiding, we all knew, but we were lying to the American people outwardly every single day. We were doing puff pieces and having very choreographed, poll-tested terminology. We were saying, he's with it. He's out there. He's juggling knives and riding a unicycle. He's got so much energy. He's on his feet, turning circles around us. He's sharp as a tack. It's not like we hit a war. Joe Biden was the president of the United States. And with every successive president, that individual is the most powerful human being to have ever lived on our planet. So for 4 years, that was Joe Biden officially, who I can only surmise every single day was the happiest man in America because he woke up and they reminded him he was president. He'd finally attained the goal, and then he immediately memory dumped it. He had his finger on the button, allegedly. It was within his control. And every one of us suffered as a result of what they did in his time in office because he wasn't Barack Obama. Barack Obama, who was smart enough and with it enough cognitively to say, no, communists, you can't quite go that far. I have to rein you in, or else the game will be up. I have to pull you back. But Joe Biden just let it go because he was physically, mentally incapable of reining in the Marxists who were within his sphere and wanted to seize power and never let an opportunity go to waste. All right. So we covered down Jill, we covered down on Jen, we covered down on Michelle. I think I've had about my fill of the worst people on earth. Oh, but how about those who cover for the worst people on earth? And again, we'll say liberal because she's not necessarily white, kind of racially ambiguous about this one. And that was one Kamala Harris, who tried to be black, but wasn't really. And she was Jamaican, and she was mostly just an idiot who talked about the significance of the passage of time and did the pumpkin where she talked with her hands. And again, proof that real Steve Friend has hands. For those watching here on Rumble, her relationship to the comprehension of the subject matter was inversely related to the size of the invisible pumpkin in her hand. So if she had kind of a grasp on things, the pumpkin was relatively small. But as she got further and further out with her hands, you knew that she had no idea what she was talking about and was desperately seeking the next word, like some sort of Google algorithm where it fills in what you're planning on typing in. Now, the New York Post is reporting about how the media has rewarded itself for the fact that it tried to install Kamala Harris in as president with some very favorable coverage. Donald Trump is currently suing CBS over this 60 Minutes interview that they did with Kamala Harris, where they sat down with her and her answers to the questions, very basic questions, they were not in depth. It wasn't like she sat down there for 12 hours and they're really grilling into the details. I mean, you're talking surface level things. I'm sure there was agreement ahead of time. You have 60 minutes tops, ask what you want to ask, and you're asking it for an audience who's consuming this information. It's not going to be really down deep in the weeds. It's going to be general areas. And still, her responses to 60 Minutes questions were so retarded that they could not air them. In fact, they went back on the editing, on the cutting room floor, and took answers to one question and installed it as an answer to another question. That's how convoluted and retarded it was. She could answer a completely different question, and yet it sounded more appropriate for the first question. That's the premise of the lawsuit that Donald Trump has launched. But in order to run cover for themselves, and is being reported in the New York Post, there's an Emmy nomination now for that interview. CBS scores Emmy nomination for 60 Minutes Kamala Harris interview at the center of a $20 billion Donald Trump lawsuit. So CBS 60 Minutes, they landed several nods from the Emmys, notably in the outstanding edited interview category. You can't write this stuff. You can't make this stuff up any better. The category for the Kamala Harris interview is Outstanding Edited Interview. And it was the primetime special featuring then Vice President Kamala Harris and running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Last fall, Trump filed a $10 billion lawsuit. It's now been doubled up to $20 billion against CBS News and its parent company, which is Paramount, for what he alleged was election interference. And this was. They were presenting this woman as having a few more brain cells than she actually did. And I don't think she has a triple-digit number of them. Here's a quote, too, from White House Communications Director Stephen Schung. Quote, "Of course it's nominated for Best Editing because it takes some serious talent to edit Kamala Harris's answer into something that's coherent and understandable, which, in the end, they still failed to do," unquote. Well, the media rewarding itself for running cover for Kamalamanism because they have to do something. They have to just scratch and claw and get back their credibility, but they're not really interested in their credibility. They're interested in just patting themselves on the back and telling themselves that they're the best because they are wholly bought into the philosophy of Marxism and communism, and they have to reward their friends, the Emmys rewarding CBS, and punish their enemies, like lying about the production in order to influence an election. All right, completely different. And we're going to pivot over to my ex-girlfriend, Garrett's ex-girlfriend, the FBI. I've got a couple stories from Headline USA. Ken Silva doing some yeoman's work over there, exposing a couple of big ones, which eluded the national spotlight. And we're going to endeavor to bring those to you here on the American Radicals podcast in light of our experiences and our subject matter expertise. So let's get to it. Headline USA, Scoop, Joe Biden's FBI treated a Pat Buchanan book as extremist literature. According to a new batch of FBI documents, special agents found one of Pat Buchanan's books while searching the home of someone affiliated with Patriot Front. Those are the guys that wear the polo shirts and khakis, and they do the high knees, and they don't actually do any sort of terrorism. But you notice that they're not marching around very much these days. It's almost like it was an op. I don't think it was an op. I think it was just a bunch of idiots who were heavily infiltrated, which would comport quite nicely with the fact that this was a search warrant for someone who was affiliated with Patriot Front, even though I don't know of any crimes that Patriot Front committed other than, I don't know, petty vandalism, putting stickers on backs of QR codes on backs of street signs. So this was in September of 2021, so less than a year into the Biden administration. The agent sees this Pat Buchanan book, which I've read. My grandfather actually handed it off to me. He said, "I think you'll find this interesting." It's called The Death of the West. It's about like how we're not having enough babies. And sent it to the media review team at the FBI. According to FBI records, the person who owned the Buchanan book described himself as a traditional Nazi. He felt more animosity to blacks than anyone who was Jewish, though. So he's more of a racist against blacks than Jews. But that's not illegal in America as long as you don't take any violent action against the people. You're entitled to be a jerk. And yet Joe Biden's FBI jumped all over it and took his book away and said that apparently a guy who ran for president is pretty prominent. Somehow that's evidence of, I don't know, a anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremist, racially motivated violent extremist. They did that. But that is, after all, the FBI who employed this individual. Second story coming from Ken Silva at Headline USA. Headline is, an FBI tech masturbated in bureau office and sent recordings to teenagers. Only the best and brightest folks hired by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, the former FBI tech, and just for information about what an FBI tech is, they're the guys that operate the radios. They make sure the comm systems are running. They can be kind of a jack of all trades as it comes to technological issues. It's not an agent. It's not someone who's a gun toter. They're not doing intel work, but they do work in the office. And according to Headline USA, his name is Justin Carroll. He wasn't caught due to the vigilance of his fellow agents. Rather, Carroll may have gotten away with his lewd acts indefinitely if one of the teenagers hadn't sent him a Valentine's Day gift. Now let's dig in more. FBI Nashville, that is a brand new field office. They combined the FBI Memphis with the FBI Knoxville office. There were two in the state of Tennessee, and they said that doesn't make sense. Let's just put one central hub in Nashville. So FBI Nashville's office received an unmarked package on March 5th, 2021. The package was treated as suspicious, with a special agent bomb tech examining it. But inside there was only a teddy bear and some candy. Agents tracked down the sender of the package, spoke to the teenager's mother. The mother told the FBI that she'd speak to her daughter about why she sent the package and to whom. Once the mother and the FBI put two and two together, the investigation ramped up quickly. After interviewing the mother and the teenager, agents obtained a search warrant for Mr. Carroll's online accounts, and that's when they realized he was masturbating right next to them and video recording it inside an FBI space and sending it to teenagers. So that pedophile is now in prison, but I do think it's funny how the FBI relied on a teenage girl falling in love with an FBI tech and sending him a package. They couldn't look at those guys. That's how low this threat is. Talked about it in the past, talked about it in other programs, talked about it to fellow suspendable Kyle Seraphin. Child exploitation, human trafficking are some of the lowest priorities in the FBI. They're never put at the top. Now, there might be an appetite for it, which I'm here for. I think it's one of the most important things that our law enforcement entities can actually investigate it here now that we have some new leadership over at the FBI, but I'm not part of that process. And again, the prioritization goes back to something that is problematic, and that is the quota system, integrated program management. That's where they prioritize what they want to assign people to work, where they want to put the hours and the personnel and the material and the manpower. Child pornography, CSAM, child sexual abuse material, is one of the lowest priorities for the FBI. You're talking about in a field office, less than a dozen individuals, and that will include support staff as well, actually working on this violation. Now, you have the opportunity to opt out of it. It's sort of a voluntary rotation. You can say, I can't handle it, can't compartmentalize it. I have a family. It's impacting me. I'm getting PTSD, and you will receive some sort of an accommodation. But I think it also boils down to a national priorities issue, even outside of what the FBI deems to be worth its time. And even if the FBI is saying, we want to go after moms at school board meetings and people who pray outside of abortion clinics and those that like to go to a Latin mass, which we all know is fundamentally evil, objectively evil, diametrically opposed to what you would want a law enforcement outlet to actually pursue. But independent of that, independent of a rogue FBI, we have a societal problem. And the problem is people don't want to think about it. Outside of a few times where it's become pushed to the forefront, where you have a Sound of Freedom movie gain momentum and traction against Hollywood's preferences. If you remember, they tried to stop that from happening. So maybe it is a good thing we're now going to tariff Hollywood. It's just a blip on the radar, and then it goes away. People don't want to think about the dark corners of society. It's a talking point for an election. 300,000 missing children. When's the last time you heard about that? there isn't really a demand for it. Whatever you demand, you receive from your government for the most part, unless there's communists in charge, which for us, unfortunately, is most of the people in charge. But we don't want to think about how the person down the street, regardless of their race or their creed or their socioeconomic level, their place in society. Oh, that guy's got 40,000 images of children being sodomized. And I'll keep it family friendly. I normally don't because I want people to sit in that discomfort because I'm comfortable using it. I worked in that space. So for me to use anatomical terminology is not really a thing that makes me feel queasy. But for most in the consuming audience, it does. And I want to put that out there on people. I've watched videos that I won't share the details of. And they were a drop in the ocean on one person's one device. And they had lots of devices on one case. And that is rampant. You could take the entire manpower of the entire US federal law enforcement apparatus and assign it only to child exploitation. And it would be fully assigned. There would be nobody twiddling their thumbs thinking, oh, I'm going to check off early today. Not a whole lot to do. It's that bad of a problem. And unless we push more on it, we are not going to address the issue. It actually leads me to always throw this out there. We need to have a fundamental rethinking of the way that we do law enforcement at the very outset. Right now, if you want to carry a gun and a badge at a local, state, or a federal level, you have to answer in the affirmative to 2 questions to start that process. Will you carry a firearm? Yes. Will you use force if it is necessary? Yes. If you answer no to either one of those, you can't be in the club. You answer yes, we'll take it under advisement and consideration. We might vet you more. We'll put you through some training, but you can start the path. There needs to be a part C, a third question. Will you work child exploitation matters? If the answer is no, you can't be in the club. That question needs to be out there because right now people can opt out. And as a result, they go to other things. And can you blame them? They get pats on the back and helmet stickers every time they put dope on the table and all these piles of cash. And they say, look, we brought down this big, giant criminal conspiracy. It was a gang. Nobody wants to get a helmet sticker. Nobody wants to give a helmet sticker. They don't want to think about it. If you say, hey, I popped that pedophile over there. He had 50,000 images on a SIM card of 2-year-olds being sodomized. Nobody wants to think about it. So just food for thought here. And let's pivot off of this one and go to something different, but maybe equally dark because it always reminds us how communists are in charge. But communists, as always, are giant hypocrites. And I can think of no better example than Bernie Sanders, who is refusing to apologize for flying private.
You know, Alyssa Slotkin, senator from Michigan, she said you shouldn't be using oligarch. It's over people's head. You've gotten criticized from other people. Free Beacon says Bernie Sanders spent $221,000 on private jets fighting the oligarchy tour, paid for by friends of Bernie Sanders. That you've spent millions of dollars in campaign funds on private jet travel over the years. How do you push back on both of those things?
When's the last time you saw Donald Trump during a campaign mode at National Airport?
No. It doesn't. But he's also not fighting the oligarchy.
No. You run a campaign and you do 3 or 4 or 5 rallies in a week. The only way you can get around to talk to 30,000 people. Think I'm going to be sitting on a waiting line at United waiting, 30,000 people are waiting? That's the only way you can get around. No apologies for that. That's what campaign travel is about. We've done it in the past. We're going to do it in the future.
This jerk. Hey, man, he leaned into it. He leaned into his inner elitist because he's an elite communist. He's not a street communist. He hasn't been for a long time. I mean, he got kicked out of the commune. Bernie Sanders was in a communist commune, and they said, you're too lazy, get out. And now he's leveraged the fact that he's an angry old man yelling at the clouds to have books ghost written. There's no way this guy's sitting down and writing them. He hasn't actually done an honest day's work in his entire life. I mean, I don't know if he could even aggregate 60 minutes of content for the American Radicals podcast. No, he just sits there and screams and yells out terminology like oligarchy. And yet he sort of reminds me of another communist, Liz Warren, who we showed the video of when she was asked about Joe Biden's cognitive decline. And the host of that podcast proffered to her, do you think that Joe Biden was as smart as you? And she was taken aback. And I think more than anything that this individual could have just dared to presume at all that anyone could be at her level of intellect. It's similar here to Bernie Sanders. What I should be with the huddled masses yearning to be free. I've got to be places. I got people to see, things to do. I'm going to fly, and this is at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to fly private to get there because I got to get there and rail against those evil, wicked, vicious, rich people. Now, said it. He doesn't talk about the millionaires anymore because Bernie Sanders is a millionaire. He just only rails about the billionaires. I don't want to go too far into this because I'm getting closer and closer to calling them a hypocrite, which is the favorite thing of Republicans to do. And we all know everybody here on the American Radicals podcast isn't a Republican. At worst, you're a rhino, a conservative, a fiscal conservative who wants to be relatively free in this country and just has nowhere else to go. You're Richard Gere. Sorry. And I'll pivot from air travel of the elite to maybe the huddled masses. And this is a story that came from New York Post. It was about a viral video for this individual who's trying to fly a discount airline, which is miserable, where they try to nickel and dime you to death. And this guy showed up at the Frontier Airlines desk 50 minutes, 50, before takeoff. And apparently Frontier Airlines has this arrangement that you have to be there at least 60 minutes or else you incur a fine because they're going to get you one way or another. And there was this video that emerged about how he was treated by the staff. And I've got a little clip of it for you. Let's give this one a watch.
They made that flight. You didn't. And you think, you're going to check me in. I bet you we won't. Okay?
I paid for a ticket.
And you paid $25 for agent assistant, and you checked in 3 hours later. Hello.
I just said that I
was going to get on your flight.
Yeah, I just said that I would pay the $25.
And you thought you was going to get on your flight. And you thought you was going to get on your flight. And you thought you was going to get on your flight. And you thought you was going to get on your flight.
I literally paid for a ticket. I'm here 30 minutes. I'm here 30 minutes before my flight, and they're not letting me check in.
And you're not getting on your flight.
Because it's a policy. We don't control that.
And you will never fly.
You were about to let me check in. You were about to let me check in, and you decided that you ain't going to let me check in.
Make me check you in.
I wonder what the company policy is on filming customers as they come to the gate. I mean, it is the hospitality industry, right? They were very, very angry at him for making them try to do their jobs. But a little bit more about details of the story. So this guy, it was a 20-minute back and forth with these women. Eventually, he agrees, all right, I'll pay you the $25. And then he kind of mutters under his breath that this is the last time he's going to be flying their shitty airline. And they take umbrage to that he's now cursed at them. Now, this is from the customer. He says, when I said that, the lady who I was talking to took a step back and gasped and was like, how dare you curse at me? I'm not checking you in. I don't have to check you in. He winds up summoning the police over there, and they kind of de-escalate the situation. He gets on the plane. He's able to process through. But before he does, he kind of pokes the cops offline, like, am I the jerk here? I mean, which is kind of reasonable. Like, you want to have some self-ownership, some self-awareness, and say, like, am I the a-hole? And the cops are like, no, we actually deal with this all the time from this particular staff, and I don't think that it'll be the last time that we do. So the moral of the story is don't fly Frontier Airlines. Avoid all discount if you can. He is not flying Frontier Airlines going forward. He wound up getting a $500 JetBlue ticket for his return flight, which is probably equally as bad. I got a couple more stories to get to here as we're rounding out the Saturday grab bag on the American Radicals podcast. Tease this one at the outset. Comes from Vanity Fair. I read it, so you don't have to. But actually, this one was fun to read because if you remember, we had the origin story episode a couple Saturdays ago where there was a girl we called Karen, and she was a early 20s marketing intern who was just living high on the hog, had no ability to grasp how conceited and how much of a jerk she was. I think I might have found where Karen wound up. I think she writes for Vanity Fair. In jest, of course, guys. The article is entitled, Why Are Americans So Obsessed with Protein? Blame MAGA, written by Kezia Weir. Now, if you remember the Karen story, she was very concerned about what food she was eating. She really liked avocado toast and yogurt, which do have protein in them. So maybe this isn't Karen, but you never know. Dig into the story because we have to make everything about the evil orange man. For decades, an American protein mania has been building. This year, it may be hitting its peak. Quote, I don't have a good sense of what's driving that right now, other than if it's just the usual manosphere or manomania here in the United States, unquote, said Peter Cohen, an internist at Cambridge Health Alliance and associate professor at Harvard, who leads the center's supplement research program. Quote from Peter, everyone's letting their testosterone out these days. One thing that he's noticed, more men than women arrive at his office interested in protein. It is a macronutrient. You have carbs and fats and protein. So being interested in one of the three doesn't seem like it's overly concerning, particularly when protein at a just basic health level helps you build muscle, which everyone needs to survive. But apparently that is a problem with MAGA. Back to this Vanity Fair article, the intertwinement of masculinity and red meat and its attendant health properties, namely protein, is strong and deep-seated. A 2023 study found that men were more likely to eat foods to the extent that those foods were perceived as higher in masculinity and lower in femininity. Why would men want to eat manly foods and women want to eat feminine foods? And those correlated to a higher level of protein. Or just, spitballing here, maybe guys have more of an appetite because we're larger physically. And because we're larger physically, we have a higher demand on our musculoskeletal structure. Ergo, we have a certain God-given innate desire to consume substances that are more protein rich so that we don't lose muscle mass and wither away and die and become a soy boy who has to rely on avocado toast and tofu. But that has eluded the grasp of Karen, who's writing over at Vanity Fair. One more, and I got a video to accompany it, complete shift. And this one pertains to a Texas law that has now gone into effect. It's called the Baby Moses Law, and it's to save babies. And I think that's a good way, and it's a good way to round us out here on a Saturday. Let's give this a play and break it down a little bit more.
Maryland Fire Department is commending a young mother for the difficult choice she made. She surrendered her newborn under the state's safe haven law. And tonight they're sharing the story with the hope that it could help someone else.
Known as the Baby Moses Law, parents have the option to safely surrender newborns in Texas. No questions asked, no consequences, as long as the baby is 60 days or younger and has not been harmed.
There are no criminal charges against the parents. The parents did the right thing. This was a newborn born probably in the last few hours.
Together, she and her boyfriend told firefighters they were unable to care for the child. Paramedics checked out mom and baby before taking them to the hospital. These signs signal that it's a safe place to surrender a newborn. That includes fire stations, hospitals, and EMS provider.
A young couple or even a young mother on her own that thinks there's no other option of what to do with their baby, there is an option, and this is a safe, great option to give that baby a chance at a normal, healthy life.
And that newborn is now in the state's care temporarily while they work on finding a permanent family.
So, possibly tragic and very sad story. I mean, it's got to be tremendously difficult for that couple to go through that, but they came to that conclusion. And instead of going the other route and murdering the baby, they have now surrendered the baby to hopefully find a home, a loving home for that little one. And for all the push about how we're going to see this spike in back alley abortions after the Dobbs-Jackson decision emerged, and how states didn't care about the parents. They've in Texas passed some legislation saying we love babies even if the parents came to the conclusion that just horrible conclusion, and I think maybe erroneous, but I would rather see the baby live than fall victim of their erroneous decision. And there's now a mechanism for people to bring forward and offer opportunities for other couples seeking to provide a home life for a small person and a future. And I think it made me smile, even though, in light of a tragic circumstance to begin with, it made me feel pretty good. So that's the total. That's the total grab bag. I got through it all in just over an hour. So I churned and burned pretty fast today. I didn't have a lot of banter back and forth with Garrett. So maybe that's what it was. But I know you're all missing Garrett today. I will do my best to fill in those big shoes on a biblical worldview and inspired by our last story. Let's go to Psalm 127, verse 3-5. Children are a blessing and a gift from the Lord. Having a lot of children to take care of you in your old age is like a warrior with a lot of arrows. The more you have, the better off you will be, because they will protect you when your enemies attack you in court. Can't sum it up any different than that. And also a palate cleanse, as we love to do here, in line with our final story and our verse. And now we have John Christ, who is a Christian comedian, coming up with some biblical baby names. Send it.
Okay, here we go. Cute Bible names for kids in 2024 if they didn't have, like, negative meanings from the Bible. Harlot. Are you serious? Harlot. That's Pharisee. That's, honestly, listen how that rolls off the tongue. Pharisee. Come eat your goldfish. Gomorrah. I feel it. I mean, I'm not going to rule out Hades. Really. Hades, Nineveh. Dead. Listen, a lot of people, that's an Old Testament Bible story. People don't even know that city was terrible. Just rock with it with confidence. Yo, what's up? My name's Nineveh. Talk me out of Lucifer. For sure, dude. There's already Christopher. Lucifer. Heresy. Listen, it could, if you got twins, Pharisee and heresy. Gentile. Maybe genteel if it's a girl. Okay, here we go.
I love it. Even the Nineveh reference. So GOB, if not here in person, is at least with us here in spirit today. So that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast, guys. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back with you Tuesday, 10:30 on rumble.com/amradpod. If you haven't already, do give us a thumbs up, follow the program, and try to share it. Share it with a friend. Hope you enjoyed it today. We'll be back with you next week. Until then, guys, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.